Welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Kevin Callahan. And welcome to the show, Kevin. We're going to talk a little bit about wayfinding, but kind of to get us started, Kevin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. Well, first off, thanks for having me. It's always fun to sit down with folks and have a conversation. So yeah, my name's Kevin Callahan. I consider myself a leadership wayfinder, and that encompasses a lot of different kind of disciplines. But fundamentally, what it's about is enabling leaders to navigate complex environments. And that might be a business environment, it might be a technical environment, could even be a social environment. Complexity is a thing, and when we understand it, it enables us to make better decisions as we do that navigation. And when we don't understand it, people tend to unintentionally make not as good decisions. So I want to help them make better ones.
Nice. Yeah, right on it. And just right off the bat, I have a feeling that this wayfinding metaphor comes from something. Is there some sort of is it like boating or something? I'm trying to.
So it's interesting. I can't remember where I found it, ironically, but I do remember. So I did a really amazing graduate studies program from I graduated in 2016, so 2014 to 2016 at the Case Western Reserve University, and that degree is a positive organization development and change master's degree. And one of the things, so we're trying to look at organizational change from a complexity perspective instead of a predictive control perspective. And if and so I was kind of talking about change management, in like you can't manage a complex process. Like it's unmanageable because it kind of co-evolves and it's messy and it moves around, and you don't really ever know what's happening with it entirely. You can kind of observe it. And so what's the word that describes that, like the modifier for change? Because like catalyst didn't really work, because that's like catalysts are unchanged in a reaction, and it's very sort of controlled in that way and predictable. And that had been something I had played with. And then I sort of stumbled on this idea of like fostering, but that has a bunch of weird annotations around like foster children and fostering pets, and which is amazing context, but is that really what I want to bring in to the metaphor? Or stewardship, and I really like that, but then people are like, that's weird. Like I kind of tested a little bit, and people like a flight attendant, like you're a flight attendant for change. I'm like, no, that's not it either. What is a kind of a thing where you kind of navigate, like, so this idea of navigation came in and moving through over time, and the idea that we're constantly making lots of small decisions that over time become incredibly fateful. And what might it be called? I remember a long time ago when the handheld GPS were first coming out, and a buddy of mine, we were wilderness guides at that point, and he had one of these, and he's like talking about waypoints and navigating from waypoints and wayfinding. And I'm like, that's the word. That's what I want to kind of hook onto my professional identity. So that's a very long way of bringing in that metaphor of navigation and a sense of place and a sense of journey and lots of small decisions and responding to a journey as you bringing this sort of wilderness guide background that I have, where you have sort of what you think is going to happen, and then as you kind of go out on that endeavor, all kinds of other things introduce themselves, and you have to sometimes radically change your plan depending on what unfolds. And I think that my work, certainly writing software, is like that. At least my experience as a developer for a really long time, and definitely leading change is like that.
Nice.
So
yeah.
So yeah.
I just looked up some historical examples of wayfinding. I think it fits the metaphor, because I was talking about like Magellan, or those, trying to discover new lands. And so it's like, some things, but there's a lot of unexpected things that are going to happen too. So nice.
Yeah. And then you start thinking about like preparation, like the list that you guys ran through before the show. It's like so helpful, right? Just like a really quick, like bringing that preparation with you. I imagine you didn't just come up with that. I imagine that was in response to early shows having things that didn't go well, and they were like, we should probably We should probably put that in our pre-flight checklist. Just a hunch.
No, it's funny. It's true. It's true. Like every item in our pre-flight checklist for the show is usually tied to an event, you know. So like you know, locking up animals so they don't like spontaneously show up in the show, or I think there's one about overheating or being plugged in because one time in the middle just the batteries went out, and then so
Yeah.
got
Hard
too
drives fill
hot
up.
and shut
Yep.
down.
All the fun stuff. All the fun
Nice.
stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
so what? So you bring this metaphor into kind of the business technical world, but everything always goes perfectly to plan. So I don't
Totally.
understand why we would
Exactly.
need to.
I'm not really sure why I have a job. It's crazy. You know, it's just one big well-oiled machine. It's a Newtonian clock, and just get the variables right. It works perfectly. No, it's just, but it's funny. We joke about that, and yet the reason why I think it's funny is because there is so much of that belief. You know, and you could call it, like, I've read Frederick Taylor's, you know, just landmark work of scientific, you know, the principles of scientific management, I think is what he called it. And a bunch of people cite that, and then I asked them, well, what did you read it? And they're like, nah, of course not. It's like, well, you might want to read it if you're going to quote the source to understand what he was trying to say. But he was very much very much like a reductionist mechanical sort of clock, or Newtonian clock oriented sort of mindset about, you just got to figure out the variables and tinker with them until you get the optimal outcome, and then you just stamp that thing out. It doesn't matter. And I think that works in a lot of places, and we've learned a lot of things that maybe are more nuanced than that. Like Dave Snowden's been talking about the constructor pattern, which I understand he's kind of adapted out of quantum theory, which always makes me nervous because it's a really specific domain about subatomic particles, and we're not. So let's be careful about how we say we're just like that. So yeah, I do. So anyway, yes, change is an interesting thing, and if we can agree first and foremost that it is not predictable in that way, we're left with, well, then what do we do? And it's not like you do nothing. You know, it's not like you guys just pretend that your shows are always going to be flawless technically, and so you don't do any pre-flight stuff, and you don't pretend like, oh yeah, it's never going to happen to us. That happens to other people, but us, no, we're good. It's just going to be great. That's crazy. I quip like ostriches are horrible models for managing conflict and change, right? You don't just put your head in the sand and hope it'll go away. You got to engage with it in some other way, and so that's a big question mark. How do we engage with something that co-evolves as we engage with it, and changes as we engage with it, and changes us too? What about all that? So yeah, you're both nodding. So what do you think? I've been talking a bunch already. How's all that land with you, the two of you?
Well, yeah, you know, kind of references to Taylorism in management, or like theory X, theory Y type stuff. I'm always you know, interested in that. You know, for me, kind of being in a IoT and manufacturing area, you can kind of see the Taylorism and theory X, theory Y playing out very much in both. So it's like a very like hybrid environment, which is quite interesting. And so you know, I guess, you know, going back to that, you know, how is wayfinding different or similar to those models, and or you mentioned complexity theory as well, so you know, how do second order effects play into it? You know, what are you thinking there?
So I that's a great question. I really so I started looking at complexity theory. I was an undergrad in the early 90s at UC Santa Cruz, and UC Santa Cruz is where the discipline was founded I think it was in the 70s. There's a really fun book called The Eudaimonic Pie, which is sort of parallel stories of the discovery of what they didn't have a name for it yet, But the first, they were basically like either physicists or computer scientists, I can't remember what, and they got oscilloscopes, like the first oscilloscopes that were plugged into like analog tube computers. And so there was this belief basically, or an assumption, that any equation, and I could be butchering this story because I'm not like a math guy at all. And so mathematicians are going to be like, he didn't get that right at all. So if I totally like swing and miss on this, forgive me. But my understanding of it was there was kind of an assumption that any equation fundamentally, when you plugged it in to some device that would be able to solve it long enough, it would ultimately go to zero, or it would ultimately go to infinity, right? Like there's either closed or open equations, and all equations had to be that way. And so what these guys were discovering, and they were all guys at that point, is that certain classes of equations self-corrected within parameters. And they would watch the oscilloscope go in what we now call a strange attractor pattern. And so you get this never quite the same, but always within parameters, trace lines of plots, right? As these equations would render. And they would just sit there all night watching this oscilloscope, just like, how is this possible? How does this thing actually work? So to bring it around, when I found like the Callahan framework and really started diving into that, I've been really taking a hard look at that for a lot of years now, and feel like I finally, a couple of years ago, I stopped learning something when I would teach it. Right. And I mean, it took, like, I was working with it for years and drawing it and talking through it and answering questions about it and exploring it and sort of twisting it. And I finally, it's like, okay, I finally, after like 8 years, have my head wrapped around Callahan. Callahan helps us to understand, among lots of things, like that there is that movement, there is that dynamicism, and things, you know, it's really helping us understand that things move between those domains. And sometimes we can facilitate that movement, and sometimes something in the environment will trigger it and facilitate it. But for things that exist as an ordered thing that is predictable, any of those predictive process controls work really, really well. And for things that are not that are more nonlinear, like what you might describe them as complex, you fundamentally need a different kind of process control to safely navigate them. And that is an empirical process control. And I got that language from Don Reinertson in a talk that I can't find again. That, you know, if you're in an ordered thing, use predictive process control, like traditional project management works really well. If you're working in things that are unknowable, you got to go to, because you can't know what's going to happen. You can have very well-informed guesses. You can have hypotheses. You can have models. You can have hunches. But really, you need to be looking at what's actually happening, and then that's empiricism. And so what I like to guide organizations to do, especially, you know, this, what a beautiful blend of like ordered manufacturing, you know, like let's lock down variability on these lines. Let's do traditional theory of constraints. And then somehow we're blending in this like weird software development stuff that is not going to play the same way. You know, your software workflows are not going to play the same way that your manufacturing flows do. And so you have to treat them differently. And weird stuff happens when, you know, like in the original Ghostbusters, like you don't cross the streams, like just don't do that. Like don't cross, like keep those things separate and treat them separate and manage the risks separately, and, you know, understand the interdependence. But fundamentally, they're they're not a little bit different. They're really, really, really different. And so I try to really help people understand that, so that they can more safely navigate, you know, the decisions and commitments they're making.
Nice.
So that's a very long-winded. I'm not good at answering things succinctly.
Neither are we.
Good.
You're in good company there. Yeah.
We'll get through like 3 questions and then the hour will be up. It's like, okay.
Yeah. No, that's great. No, that we're here to hear you. So this is great. And
awesome.
Yeah, 2 things came to mind for me after hearing you kind of touch on many different things is, so it's like you're kind of you're doing things to prepare yourself for uncertainty or unexpected things, for that uncharted territory. And I guess before we get to there, I guess whenever you're in an organization or you're asked to come into an organization, do you find that they're already there? They already believe they're in a domain of uncharted territory where there's uncertainty, or does there need to be some convincing out of the kind of Taylorism when you deem appropriate? What's your usual entrance into a system, I suppose?
Yeah, well, that's yeah. So I've been an agile practitioner for about 12 years now, going on 13. Longer if you include my time as a developer on a Scrum team, which I think started in about 2008. And then I flipped into a Scrum Master role, then Agile coach, enterprise coach. And these days I train enterprise coaches. It's one of the many things I do. And so I want to know kind of how is this why are they asking me to come help? And so I've gotten a lot better. A couple of things. One is I've gotten a lot better at sort of having that conversation and sussing it out. The way that I market myself, I think, doesn't attract people that are looking for a turnkey, like a SAFe implementation, for example. Like I don't do that. I don't work with SAFe. I'm not SAFe certified. I had the opportunity to get SAFe certified years ago for free, right? Like the guy I was working for was like, I couldn't pay me to go, but he would literally give me the cert. And I'm like, it's not worth my weekend. Like, and that was years ago. So I like to just kind of probe, sense, respond with conversationally with the people that are inviting me in. Like, kind of, how do you look at the world? Why are we talking? You know, what are you really trying to get at? Where are you trying to go? What are you trying to accomplish, if you can even articulate it, which I don't need them to. I mean, I could just start a big engagement and the only thing they could say was, we want reduced lead times. We want things to stay open less long in our tool of record. We want things to spend less time in queues waiting to be worked on and more time being worked on as a proportion of their life. And as senior management, we want more transparency into the health of this so we can make better decisions about what to do. And I'm like, if you're good with that as like the blueprint for an 18-month engagement that's 6 figures, I'm in. And they were like, yeah, let's do it. I was like, that's a coherent yes. I was like, I don't know where we'll end up, but if we spend together 12, 18 months working on that thing, and you're willing to do some of the stuff that I suggest you do, because it makes sense to you, not because I asked you to do it, I think it's coherent to believe that we can move the needle on those things for you. How far it moves is more to do with you than me. And so you have to be willing to change, you know, and so the leaders are like, I'm like, this is not going to leave you untouched. Like you're in this game too. So what are you willing to do? And so I'm giving them some ideas to push their comfort zones a little bit as well, and help them evolve and grow as leaders, just as they're asking their technical people to evolve and grow as technical practitioners. I think that's really, really important. This isn't something like, oh, go fix my teams. Like, why do you think they're that way? Just curious.
What are, maybe, do you have any examples of like how things go well and how things go not so well, and avoiding the not so well?
Well, in any specific domain or area or kind of focus?
Well, you know, I'm always pretty focused on the understanding and adoption of complexity in an organization, because I think that probably a lot of what's going on in the world, kind of in this area, is that there are a lot of people that want everything to be an exact science and treat it as such, and then get themselves into big trouble because of it. And so yeah, success stories, pain stories, those are all very interesting to me all the time.
So one of the interesting things, not always desired, but nonetheless interesting things about complex systems is they do evolve. And so depending where you are in the point of time in that evolution and how long you're in that evolution and kind of what what kinds of decisions are being made to influence that evolution, whether they're like huge, oh, we're going to take on, we're 400-person engineering department and we're going to take on an agile transformation and we're going to pivot the whole thing. Like, that sounds insane to me. Like, why would you do that? Like, how much are you going to spend, and how much, like, people aren't even going to know like what's expected as that changes. Like, it would be much nicer from my perspective. Nice is maybe not the right word there. Like, can we like nibble off a little chunk? Can we sort of find a single product that's sort of Goldilocks size, not too small, not too big, and sort of reorg that and pilot that, or even just start with where they are and apply the Kanban method and to their existing workflow, make it visible, differentiate weight and touch states, and just operate it and watch and see what happens. And then you make your next sort of experimental evolution based on that, rather than, I use a lot of batch size stuff, like sort of batching your changes in these massive things. And so an effective, one of the questions I will always ask a prospect is, how long do you think this is going to take? And they just kind of go, huh? Like, are you thinking like this is a couple of workshops? Are you thinking this is like a few weeks, this months, this years? Like, what are you thinking? And they're like, well, often they will say something like, well, I'm hoping it's months. Like, well, it might be. I'm sure you'll see some changes within months, but I've been involved in several multi-year efforts. And in my experience, that's the kind of time you're talking about to help, because not everyone likes change, not everyone's into it, and to bring people along long enough that they have enough time and experiences to fundamentally rethink and re-experience their work. Then you get a culture shift, which everyone's always talking about. Oh, we need to change the culture. It's like, yeah, good luck. Do some of this stuff evolutionarily, and in a couple of years, ask people to tell you a story again about their work, and maybe it's changed and maybe it hasn't. But I think there's a lot in there too about narrative analysis. So I don't know if that's the things that I'm looking for success-wise, or people just telling me, like Austin before. But I thought, Chris, you and I were talking about, how's your week gone, right? And I'm like, I'm on cloud 9, because I was talking to this VP yesterday at my favorite client, and he told me things have gotten a lot better since you showed up. And that's what success looks like for me. Like, I don't know that he can pin down and say, oh, we saw like a 16% reduction in lead times over here, and a 24% increase in this employee happiness survey. But people basically agree this is different and we like it more. And if that's a trend that I'm on, that's enough for me. And do they continue to pay me? Do they continue to call me? And do they continue to refer me? And as people sort of move around these big organizations and kind of bring me along, I think that's a really important positive signal that my work is valuable. And they don't always know what to do either. And so if they have somebody there who can help them through that, it's very welcomed, really, really welcomed. And so that's another sort of indication of, do they keep calling me? If they keep calling me, that's a good sign. If they don't call me, it's not necessarily a bad sign, because sometimes they just go away for a while. I've had very few engagements implode, and I have a very short but very serious professional blacklist of people I will never work with again, because it's gone so poorly. But it's only got about 6 names on it, so it's not horrible. And I don't share it. People are like, oh, who's on that? I'm like, that's not for you to know. Don't worry, you're not on it.
How does one stay off that list?
The big thing is you keep your word.
Yeah.
Operate with integrity and clean up your messes. We're gonna bump into each other. We're gonna mess up. We're gonna we're gonna have bad days. We're gonna say bad things that we don't mean, or things that we don't intend, or they'll be heard in ways that we don't intend. And I think to be able to clean that up is really, really, really important, and acknowledge that, what, I blew it. And I'm not trying to hide that fact, and I'm not trying to cover it up, and I'm not trying to justify it, and I'm not trying to explain it away. I'm just saying I messed up. Like, that was not what I wanted to have happen. Not what I meant to have happen, but that's what happened as a result of my action, and I own that completely. What do we need to do to move forward? And if people do that with me, I'm so good. And when they start like blaming me or blaming something else that was totally in their control, I got a problem with that.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, and yeah, I think that those kind of the ability to work through conflict, that is indeed super critical for team and enterprise stuff. Another thing that kind of jumped out me at the kind of team and enterprise level is, you've mentioned a few things because you started to dive into, in this wayfinding, you got to do things to prepare for unexpected things, and start making changes and see how it goes. Kind of this what you kind of pulling from Cynefin, it was the was it probe, act, sense? I'm trying to
probe, sense, respond.
Probe, sense, response. So at the team level is something I'm very familiar with. Like you said, like Kanban, make things visual. That in a sense is making them being able to sense where they weren't sensing before.
Absolutely.
And tinkering with batch sizes and all that kind of stuff. I have several things that come to mind for me at like a team level. But when you start talking about things from an enterprise level, I just have like a big vacuous cloud. So
one of the things about complexity, if you want to use the technical term, it's got a fractal geometry, and if that doesn't make sense to people, you can just say that things repeat independent of scale. And so a lot of the patterns, like for example, if a Kanban board works well at a team level, some sort of visualization of workflow works good at other levels too. And if you do that well, then you call that multi-level Kanban. And so like if I'm, one of the things I'm really excited about is there seems to be a growing interest in agile portfolio management. And how do we more effectively, I guess, manage what arrives and how and what we sort of let into the system, so to speak, the system being whatever your organization, your workflow, your value streams, whatever that thing is. Like how does stuff arrive and then how do we let it in? And Scrum has a really clear way of doing that. It's called the product backlog to the sprint backlog. And then we manage work in batches of a sprint, which, 1 to 4 weeks, whatever. Kanban doesn't have any guidance on that, except to say, make your work visible and manage flow and encourage active leadership at all levels. And, kind of those practices out of the Kanban method, but it doesn't really prescribe anything because your context is different depending on a lot of dynamics. Yeah. So I like to help those different levels of the organization. I mean, queuing theory still applies, complexity theory still applies, leading people still applies, building systems that are effective in your context and can respond still applies, not overcommitting still applies, understanding where bottlenecks are and what to do about those still applies. So it's all there. It's just, it has maybe different words attached to it. And maybe it's the scope of it is much, much larger and the amount of details in it is much, much greater. But it's still the same fundamental dynamics. I believe that the work that I stand for is based on natural laws. Like gravity is a natural law. You can choose to ignore it if you would like. Probably bad things are going to happen that you don't like if you do. What happens to flow-based queuing systems, if you overload them, it appears to be I have not seen one ever. I've not heard one represented or described. I've not heard of one or read of one being studied that doesn't exhibit the same kind of storage, breaking down its ability to deliver, to begin storing things. And that's not why we have them, right? Like you don't build freeways to store cars, you build parking lots to store cars. When you overload freeways, they become parking lots. That's like bad. And we don't have engineering teams to be busy. We have them to create value for our customers, ultimately, the people who use our stuff. And if our customers realize enough value, they'll pay us for it. And our companies like that. So you call the first thing an impact, the middle thing an outcome. And then we achieve that through output. And output's really easy to measure. And like I was just on a call this morning with another client, and it's a monthly all hands call. It's not a very big all hands, about 25, 30 people. And they throw these metrics things up that show trends of work in process, work delivered. And, what a surprise. Their work in process has gone down over the last several months at any one time. and their throughput has gone up. And I've been trying to explain this to them for years, like, this is what will happen. And so I just kind of piped in. I was like, hey, if anybody's curious about that relationship, I don't think most people in the call could see that relationship because it's a big page of numbers, no visualizations or anything. But I'm like, hey, I'm looking at those and I'm seeing those go down and those go up. There's a correlation there. I'm not sure it's causal. I have suspicions, but I would need to probe into it to see.
Yeah.
If anyone's interested in that, let me know and we can talk about it, because if we can do that, I can promise it will make your life better as a team member. And as your life gets better, the organization, like, you're going to, again, to me, it comes out of commitment and integrity. Like, can you meet the commitments? Are you committing to the right things? And when you commit to something, can you deliver on it? And theory of constraints and queuing theory help us to understand our capabilities there. And then complexity helps us to understand, if you're trying to be predictable in an unpredictable context, how do you hedge and what do you do about that? How do you prepare? And what are the things, like, I'm an avid downhill mountain biker, right? Here's my helmet right here.
Nice.
Like, I can have this helmet and it's kind of like, I spent money on it, spent money on the goggles. It can't do what I intend for it to do if I leave it here. Like, I have to put it on every time. And, things like team working agreements that nobody remembers where they are, what's in them. It's kind of like, yeah, cool, good. You bought a helmet and you left it in your trunk. And now you're going to go out cycling, which, like, you're going to bump into each other. You're two human beings, like, solving a problem together. You're going to bump into each other. And now you don't have that protective apparatus to help you get through that bump. And like, I've crashed really, really hard wearing all this armor. And I don't want to say it's fun. I mean, sometimes it's not horrible, but I get up and it's like, wow, that kind of sucked. It's probably a day-ending event, but I'm ending the day on my terms and not in an ambulance, and that's good.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did I answer your question? I felt like I went all over the place on that one.
No. I think it helps a lot. No, I think it was a great way to explain it, because I think for me, it's almost like I need to. So it's like you said, a lot of the same things. So I'm imagining a Kanban, and instead of it being like at the team level, it'd be like, oh, there's multiple people on the team, and how do we reduce work in progress, right? And that kind of thing. And so at like an enterprise level, is it like different departments or different, like what's the scale entity, so to speak?
Well, so the first question is, well, how do you create value in the world as an organization?
Right.
And where does that sort of idea about what is valuable start? And kind of like, where's the seed planted? And then where do you harvest the fruit? And there's a bunch of stuff that happens between those two events that takes time. And sometimes it depending on the context, if you're doing hardware, like, that's probably years of work time. Like, a long time ago, I got to do some work. I was living and working in California in experiential education, corporate experiential education. And we got a client that made wafer fab hardware. So like the equipment, the photolithography, cameras, like all of the stuff that these huge machines that make computer chips. And so what they were finding is their sales team didn't actually understand the technology that they were selling. And so they hired us to train on an offsite, to come to their sales team offsite and custom build them a game about all wafer fabrication and all of these trade-offs. And like, we literally gave them like pieces of poster board and glue, and like they had to like make mocks of wafer fab process. And I totally lost the thread of where I was going with that. But that even then they still knew like the guy that trained us, he's like, as an industry, we have like a 5-year roadmap. Like, we know where chip manufacturing is going in 5 to 10 years. Like, we already know it. It just takes that long to retool wafer fabs, because this equipment is prohibitively expensive. And once you buy it, like, you need to milk it for as long as you possibly can to pay it off. Like, when he's saying basically, like, we're hitting the scales that we're working at now. Theoretically, we have, and in labs, we have transistors that are 3 molecules wide. And you put a single electron in the middle one, and now you have a gate. Now you have a switch. We can't, it's not stable enough to manufacture, but we can make one in the lab. The other thing he said that blew my mind was gamma rays are not cutting a straight enough line in our photolithography anymore. Like far spectrum blue light, you know, that is so, the wavelengths are so tight, like that can't cut a straight enough line through your substrates. Like that's crazy, right? You know, and so they're starting, that was the very beginning of, we're going to start putting multiple cores on the same chip because that's the only way to scale this anymore. We've already shrunk it down to the physical limits of the materials. And now we're just going to start replicating them. And I don't know, what are they up to, like 16 cores on a chip now? It's crazy.
The proverbial death of Moore's law, right? Is the
yeah, exactly.
And yeah, I always find that very interesting because everything's expanding in different ways still, but this is the era of the chips becoming bigger now.
So anyway, can I go back to Austin's question, because I still don't think I answered it very well. So again, at the enterprise level, we want to understand, how do you create value? And then we want to say, all right, how do we organize around that? What are we doing today? And it might be like departments, right? It might be like, you know, tens to hundreds of people. And still fundamentally what we're looking at is, as these items move through this workflow, and it might even be a work network, right? Like different things take different pathways. Like it's never as linear as we might like. The fundamental question I still want to ask is, does stuff spend more time waiting to be worked on than you would like? And if so, what do you want to do about that? And most places are just crippled by too much work in the system. And they're just flooded with WIP. They don't know what to do about it. They don't know how to turn off the spigot. They don't know how to differentiate high value stuff from low value stuff. They don't know how to say no. They don't know how to prioritize. They allow all this back channel weird kind of pet requests to come through. And then they wonder, like, why aren't we predictable? And why doesn't anything come out of the right hand side of our operation, the right hand being the delivery end, as we would like? Or why is it so broken? Or why is it so the wrong thing? That's not at all what we asked for. What happened along the way? And that's kind of what we see in software all the time. So those are the dynamics that we see. Of course, we see a lot of the similar dynamics at the team level, and a lot of the things like, hey, didn't you know that if you take something that no one fully understands and you get a bunch of really smart people to work on it all at once, you tend to end up with a better result. Like everyone understands it better, the decisions are better, the design's cleaner, there's fewer defects, it's more fit for purpose. Isn't that funny that happens? Yeah, that happens at the enterprise scales too. But it's just like, how do you facilitate when 50 people come to a meeting? How do you facilitate when 250 people come to a meeting? And you don't, and you need their contribution, right? Like, so those are some of the questions that I like to play with, and those are some of the environments I like to play in. Yeah, helping people, you know. And it's just so funny. Like one of my clients, I got invited in years ago into their sort of like their technical, you know, software part. And all the software people are complaining, well, you know, really the problem is, you know, the PMO, really the problem is the business, because they're the ones that are making all these decisions, not us. And, you know, and I'm like, go talk to them. We can't. Well, who can? Well, our top manager, our director can. Well, go ask him to talk to them. Like, and we can't. And tell me all these reasons why. Literally yesterday, I'm talking to like the director of this bit, like this kind of function. And she's like, I don't understand how can we improve? How can we get better? Like, oh my gosh. Like you've been sitting here waiting for somebody to come talk to you, haven't you? And no one will. And that pattern has played out a lot, whether it's with audit or legal or whomever, like these dependencies we have organizationally, and we end up waiting for them because we don't prepare them and include them. And then when you start preparing them and including them, suddenly they're like, yeah, we'd love to help. No one ever comes down here. No one ever talks to us. So anyway,
nice. Yeah. So we are hitting the end of our toolbox.
How do we do that?
Yeah.
Do we have to stop?
Too much good stuff, man. That's a good problem. So right on. Yeah, I resonate with what you were saying last, where a lot of it is just getting the whole system in the room in some ways, and which is kind of the heart of ensembling. So that's really cool. But before we close out, is there anything you'd like to share or plug?
Oh, well, I'm an independent practitioner, and I'm always looking for the right people who resonate with what I can offer and that I can help with. So I've got a website, kevin-callahan.com. It's a good place to start. The call to action on that website is to book a chat with me. I'm not really interested in collecting an email address or, sending people stuff. I don't have a big marketing funnel. I want to talk to people and just run through a few questions together. And if we can make something happen, that's awesome. And if we can't, and we just kind of join each other's networks, that's awesome as well. So individual leaders, I work with them, individual coaching, leadership development. I work with teams of all kinds to become more effective together, how they communicate, how they work. If they're technical teams, I can do some technical coaching or pull in technical coaches that I pair with. And then, whole organizations, whether that organization is a group of teams, like a division, an entire company. It's fun to find a place to kind of slot in and start helping folks. So go check out my website. I've got some stuff about leadership wayfinding there, and let me know, reach out, ping me on LinkedIn, ping me on the website, and thank you both again for having me. It's been super fun.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kevin, for being on the show. And to our audience, if you feel like an ancient explorer wayfinding through the market, struggling, got some parts of the map figured out, but a lot undiscovered and uncertain, and trying to find your way, improve your throughput and things like that. Maybe share this episode with this person, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on wayfinding and these principles. You can reach out through LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and more. And we just love hearing your passion, your thoughts, your opinions. So please share them with us. But until next time, have a good one, y'all. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, everybody.